Welcome, Representative. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you to the Planning and Development Committee for hearing my testimony. I am here in opposition to Bill 6890. Whilst I love the idea of transit-oriented development and have seen many successful ones in my area, I represent both Norwalk and Darien. In Norwalk, South Norwalk has a very large community right around their station. And in Darien, we have 3 new ones that are being developed right now. So I am a big fan, but there are some issues with this particular legislation that I do not like. One is the density. We live in, I represent communities that are very populated and Lower Fairfield County. So taking the density to 20 houses per acre for less than 60,000 or 30 houses per acre for greater than 60,000 is a lot to take for communities. And out of the 2 districts that I do represent, Norwalk has 4 train stations and Darien has 5 that are within the half-mile radius. So a couple are outside of Norwalk, but the half-mile radius is still within, or excuse me, Darien, they are outside of Darien, but still the half-mile radius is within Darien. So there's no specific language in this, and whether if the station is outside, whether you're responsible for creating this transit-oriented development, if those count, if those don't count, or if it's, so we have one that lies in Stamford, if Darien would be required to do the 30 houses per unit because the station actually lies within Stamford. That seems to be a little ambiguous and unclear. My next issue is this phrase determined by coordinator that is seen throughout the bill. And it is, it's regularly stated, and it's clearly a new position that will have to be formed. And their duties are vast. And one of the issues is, will they even know the towns with which they are overseeing? Will they understand the issues within that municipality? And kind of looking through some of those duties that you see with this new coordinator, those duties are already done by our local planning and zoning committees, except that our local planning and zoning staff also consider traffic, roads, and local schools. So looking at this coordinator as being a non-elected official, the other things that they are allowed to do is they can change the amount of density. If the 20 or 30 units per acre is not enough for this person that we don't know yet who it will be, they can add more. They can decide.
Representative, your 3 minutes are complete.
Okay, thank you. So just finishing up, they also look at the deed restriction and can change that. They can look at reasonable size and change. And so in conclusion, I guess one of the last things I just would like to mention is that whilst we want to be a state that really relies on our transit-oriented communities, we are not there yet. We had many speakers in Transportation Committee from the non-English speaking community that stressed this in many ways because they were struggling to get their driver's license. And whilst we want to be that state that relies on this kind of transportation, we're not quite there yet. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I see my co-chair has question. Representative Cabros-Douglas, please.
Thank you so much, Co-Chairman. I thank you, Rep. Marra, for coming in today. I actually don't have a question. I just did want to clarify that this position, this Office of Responsible for, this has actually been in place since 2006. Governor Rell was the one who put that in. So it's not really a new position in terms of what they do. And because it's an opt-in in the legislation, the control still resides with the local municipality or city. It's because it's an opt-in. It's not a forced mandatory kind of thing. So I just did want to clear that up because that might assuage some of your fears. So thank you again for coming to testify today, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Can I comment? I appreciate that it is an opt-in. And if it were truly an opt-in idea, then I think that would be great. But realizing that discretionary funding for these towns is held until you opt in, it's not really an opt-in. We have towns that really need things like the brownfield grants, that if that's held over their head, that if they don't do this, they cannot get those grants. That's not really an opt-in.
I'm hoping that throughout the day today, we'll be able to speak with some folks, and so that we can actually clear up this discretionary funding piece, because I think it's been misinterpreted a little bit. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ranking Member Senator Pazia. You draw his question. It's good. I see Rep. Dubesky, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative, for coming in. Now, what towns do you represent?
Norwalk and Darien.
Okay, and how many people in each of those towns?
So,
Approximately.
Norwalk, so Darien has about 22,000. Norwalk is mid 90s, maybe a little higher now.
Okay, and what type of transit facilities do they have?
So Norwalk has an extensive busing service, as well as the Metro North line and the Metro North line through Darien as well.
Okay. What would it be fair to say that if you took a pen and you drew a circle on a map, half a mile wide around each of the transit stations in your two towns, it would cover most of the towns?
Especially in Darien, yes.
Okay.
Five train stations that are within a half mile in Darien.
Wow. Do you happen to know what the average zoning density is in those towns?
I do not.
Like, is it 1 acre zoning, half acre zoning? Do you have any idea?
Darien is I can look that up for you. Darien is more the 1 acre zoning. I'm not
Okay.
sure. Norwalk is less.
Okay, so generally it's about 1 acre per single family residence?
Correct.
Okay. What would it do to that town if the town was forced to change the zoning to allow for 20 units per acre instead of 1?
Right. So, I mean, it could increase by 50,000 if you go to the maximum amount. If you've got 5 times 20, 50, yeah, 50,000.
So,
But this
so
is all seems to be discretionary, right? Because it's not very clear if it would be the full acreage or partial or a piece of land. It's not really well spelled out. So we would be at the mercy of the coordinator to decide whether it's a parcel of land, whether it's the full amount, whether the density goes up to the full 20 acres or any of it.
right. Yeah, the whole thing about one unelected person making all of these decisions with regard to the land use in 169 municipalities didn't sit well with me either. It is kind of unclear as to what powers this person would have. It seems to me from the text of the bill that this administrator, this coordinator, would have virtually unlimited power to compel towns to accept a change in their zoning to allow for significantly greater density. Is that how you see it as well?
Not only that, Representative, but also that it's not thinking of the towns holistically. As when you're dealing with a local planning and zoning, they know when you bring apartments into the town, you're also bringing children into the town. So you really need to think about your local school districts. And to have that be a secondary thought is just not appropriate for the town. Many people do move to the towns, firstly because of business opportunities, and secondly, they look at schools. And I know right now in my district in Norwalk, they are struggling they are seeing overcrowding in their school system. To have something like this built and have the school as an afterthought. If you're going to press something like this on a town or insist upon something like this, then you need to also consider the schools in that town too.
Right. And I imagine it's not just schools, but you also have to think about whether or not a town has sewer and water, which most of my towns do not. You have to think about, what kind of social services are available, if there's a senior center, or if there are, if there are any type of amenities, transportation, all those things need to be considered. And it does not appear from this bill that the administrator would be required to consider any of that.
That is definitely not on the list of requirements within this
Right.
bill. So whether it's going to be put in language later, or it was a missed thought, and these are definitely issues also that local planning and zoning committees do think about. They do think when an apartment building or a multifamily home unit is built, how many 1 bedrooms, how many studios, how many 2 bedrooms, and with those, how many kids will be coming in the area, and do we have the school system to be able to absorb those schools and keep our district at a high functioning level. And these are all very thoughtful decisions that are made at a local level.
Right. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you for coming in and discussing this with us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And McCarthy Behe, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And Representative Marra, it's nice to see fellow Public Health Committee members here testifying today. And I'm only sorry that I'm not there to see you in person. That's one of the Zoom disadvantages, is that when you're talking to each other on Zoom, I'm looking at myself rather than looking at you. So I know you can see me smiling. I just wanted to touch base on a couple of the things that you said. And as a fellow Fairfield County resident in a larger community, 62,000, though not larger than Norwalk, who has seen a significant number of transit-oriented developments, after we created a zoning overlay district here in the 133rd by the Fairfield Metro train station. And I just wanted to talk for a moment about just something you said about apartments and children. And it's not a gotcha question. It's more of a comment, but it's a sincere question. And I think this is something a lot of people are unaware of. That here in Fairfield, I'm wondering if you were aware of any statistics, because what we found statistically here in Fairfield with a number of the apartments that have been built by the train station in particular, mostly they're 1 and 2 bedroom. Primarily, it's very rare that there are 3-bedroom units, but the number of children coming in is de minimis. And it's not that there are none. There certainly are, but they're not nearly what I think many in our community had expected. And I think that's something that, as we talk about this, you're right that we want to look at the family impact. And I think in many ways we want to be able to welcome families in appropriate places. But I just wondered if that was a surprise to you, or if you had other thoughts or information about that.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. And yes, this is why, looking at this from a very local viewpoint. Certainly within the transit-oriented development that we have coming in, and I can specifically speak on Darien because we just had an update with this, looking at, like I said, looking at some of them are studios, some of them are 1 bedroom, some of them are 2 bedroom. Not all of them have a bath in them, right? So that would, that would mean that children are less likely to come into those, but they are looking at those specific units. We have estimated an extra 40 students coming into the town for fall. So yes, very, very closely looked at. And you're right, the number of bedrooms within the unit are important, and it's important to have a good understanding of that. And if it's done without the local input, if you do have 2 and 3 bedroom with baths in it, and you haven't talked to your local board of ed, there's, there could be an issue.
So I want to thank you for that. I think it's a conundrum for us because as an aging population state, as most New England states are, we want to be able to invite and encourage families to move. And as we know, Fairfield County, we are the population density of our state. And as we do this, I think one of the real attractiveness of something like this bill in particular, is we are asking communities to decide for themselves. And I think it's why it's worked so well here in this part of Fairfield, is that we proactively, as a community, through a state supported and funded charrette process, got that community input and did really designate, here are where we can develop. We had another state funded planning process that basically suggested a number of ideas and thoughts for us to, as a community, to adopt. And we did adopt some of them. We did not adopt all of them. So I think that these are questions we're going to need to continue to wrestle with. And I appreciate you taking the time to be here. And I hope that we can keep working together as to what really we can do. Just like we talked about with the example with the fire department. It's a very different example, but it's helpful for us to think of one another as we think about neighbors in our regions, and certainly Fairfield County. We all impact one another and the state together tremendously. So I thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity.
Thank you. Rep Hall, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome, Representative. A couple of questions. So we talked a little bit about this being an opt-in with a very big stick is the way I like to look at this bill. So if you eliminate the big stick, right? So we truly do an opt-in. In essence, that's what the towns are doing now, correct? So I'm sure your towns have a plan of conservation and development that the state requires them to do, right? Have they looked at their town holistically and said, okay, this is where we can develop. This makes sense for our town, whether it be like Rep. Dubitsky alluded to, sewer, water lines, those kind of things. So does your community look holistically at how they want to see their towns developed?
Thank you so much for that question. And I would like to extend an invite from our planning and zoning chair to please come to Darien, take a tour and talk to our planning and zoning about some of their accomplishments already, some of the things that they're already doing within the town bylaws, the town rules. They have taken, even with 830G, they have taken the minimum 10% of affordable housing and they've increased it to 14%. We have 3 transit-oriented communities coming available now as we speak. One of them is fully rented. The other one is mostly rented. One is by the Darien train station, the other one by the Norotan train station. And we just started demolition on a third that's also by the Norotan train station. And we're very proud of the work that's happening in Darien for sure. So yes to all of your questions. It's very thoughtfully done, and it's done throughout the team. It's not just planning and zoning. It's not just the first selectman. It's planning and zoning, talking to Board of Finance, talking to Board of Ed, talking to the local RTM. It's everybody involved on that local level to get these projects done, and thoughtfully bringing in retailers. And we're pretty excited about what's happening. The sidewalks, the walkability will be fantastic, and really would invite you to come see.
So thank you. In that answer, you actually answered one of my other questions. So you already are at 10% and you're exceeding that by an additional 4%. So you're at 14%.
Well, so that's of the multifamily units that are being developed. When they are being developed, they have to have that minimum of the 14%. Yes.
Right. Okay.
Correct.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for testifying. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much. Senator Hong, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome, Representative Marra. There's talk about the option of opting in on this bill, but to me, it's you can opt out, but then you won't get funding. Seems like a big and heavy stick instead of a carrot, as many people are articulating. Not that Darien gets a lot of money, but for many other communities, it's a misleading statement. Would that be fair to say?
That would be fair to say. And also, I don't know if you sat in on any of the early discussions about work, live, ride, live, work, ride. But when we sat in those discussions, I was specifically told that these grants would not be included in this. But when we see this in the bill, it is. So where did we go from, no, we're not going to mess with your brownfield grants, or we're not going to mess with your sewer and water, to these were questions that were had early on, and for them to not be in the bill as we see it now, I think really bothers me. The other thing about opting out, you're right, Darien doesn't necessarily get a lot of these grants, but Norwalk does, and they've got a brownfield grant coming right now. And if they're not able to fully opt into something like this, I mean, that brownfield grant is very significant to helping their town. So
Thank you for that clarity, and it is frustrating, and the lack of transparency is indeed frustrating for me as well. Knowing that you represent also portions of Norwalk, what's interesting in regards to TOD design, there is no kind of tiering. What I mean by tiering is large municipal train stations like Norwalk train station versus small community-based train stations. There's no differentiation. So in your case, I would love for you to articulate a little bit the differences between the Darien main train station and Norotan Heights, and Rowayton Heights. Rowayton has a train stop that's part of the train line. Those are all considered transit-oriented districts, but their position is distinctly different. Can you articulate that this one size fits all does not fit everyone?
thank you. The infrastructure around some of these train stations varies widely. If you're talking about whether you've got roads that can handle capacity, or if they're nestled in a very small community, you just can't compare the infrastructure between the two. If you're looking at, obviously Stanford's very big. Obviously there's, some in Norwalk that are very big, but when you have the tiny ones, they don't have the infrastructure around them to handle something like this. Absolutely.
And I'm just going to quick pivot, and thank you, Mr. Chair, is these three train stations that I'm talking about are near coastlines, the Long Island Sound. We're talking about the reality of climate change and rising sea level. You're looking at significant as of right development without local input. Tell me about the environmental as well as the ecological impact when you build up density near these kind of transit-oriented areas, particularly in Rowayton and Norotan Heights. These are all practically below sea level.
Right. Well, I think really what I would like to focus on is the fact that, and in particularly in the two main lines in Darien, is that they are being built up right now very thoughtfully. And I think that we are, I think other towns need to come and see how we're doing it. I think we're doing a great job. We're keeping the community in mind, the community needs in mind. Yet we also understand that there is a need for people to utilize the train station and to be close to the train station. So yes, we have flooding issues. We have lots of flooding issues, and that is paramount in thoughts when we build. So when we certainly the one over in Norotan Heights, it has huge flood mitigation that is, was built before they ever got to the regular construction of it, and very thoughtfully done because we do have lots of flooding in our area.
And I'll close by saying it's important, but nowhere in this bill does it account for allocation and funding. So if you are building and if there is development by outside entities, ultimately it's the towns that are responsible for building that infrastructure. Burden on the taxpayer of each respective town. Would that be fair to say?
That'd
Based
be fair.
upon your example?
Yes, and I mean, as I kind of mentioned in my statement, roads, traffic, schools are not talked about here. And if you want to talk about why someone moves to an area, let's talk about schools.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Marra.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Any other question? Dilneke, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for coming forward here to testify on this. You mentioned that one of your communities had literally 5 train stations. So that literally, I think it was what, Darien? And the entire town would fall under this TOD proposal?
And I imagine you've got a couple of people that are giving testimony after me that could share exact amounts. But it's been a year or two since I've looked at the map, but it's quite significant. There's 2 that are just outside of Darien, but within the half-mile radius. It's, yes.
Do these towns have their own sewer treatment plants, or is it a regional treatment plant down there? And I ask that question based on the fact that if you were to have 20 units per acre,
yeah,
the demands that would be placed upon the sanitary sewer system would be substantial,
Mhm.
and would probably trigger a large renovation expansion project, which then would probably trigger having to meet the highest level of treatment standards.
Right. So Norwalk has their own, and then Stanford, Darien uses Stanford's sewer system. So yes,
What about Darien?
uses Stanford's.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that's something that, needless to say, would have to be taken into account significantly, because you could very well see large pipes having to be put into the ground to be able to handle that kind of a situation. And conversely, you'd also have to consider whether or not your water mains would be of a substantial enough size to support the demand of 20 units per acre. Would that be a concern?
I think the concern is that this would be all overseen by a coordinator that doesn't have their hands into any of the local issues. So our planning and zoning team and are on this, and they understand the issues behind it. They need to be the ones in on the decision making.
Yeah, I only mention that because many a time we don't focus on some of the other less glamorous infrastructure issues.
Yes.
and we fail to take into account sanitary sewer and drinking water delivery to that kind of a dense development.
Well, certainly those on the beaches think about sewers regularly after a big rain, so.
Well, thank you for coming forward and thank you for your answers there. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to ask a few questions.
Thank you. Any other question? Any other question? Seen or hear none. Thank you, Representative, coming
Thank
here,
you.
taking
Appreciate it.
time. Your testimony.